In the heart of Thrace, beneath the rugged hills and cold winds, a boy was born whose fate would echo through history. His name was Spartacus, and though his beginnings were humble, destiny marked him for something greater than chains. Thrace was a land of warriors, men who lived by the sword and the honor of their tribes. Spartacus grew strong among them, learning the art of battle long before Rome ever learned his name. But Rome's empire was expanding, swallowing lands and people under its rule. The Thracians resisted, proud and fierce, yet even their spirit could not hold against Rome's legions. In a campaign of conquest, Spartacus and many of his kin were captured. Stripped of freedom, his sword replaced by iron shackles, he was marched south into the depths of Rome's dominion. Sold at auction like livestock, Spartacus was condemned to the life of a gladiator. The arena became his new battlefield, the sand his stage, and death his constant shadow. He was sent to Capua, one of the great gladiator schools of the Republic. There, under the ruthless eye of Gladiator, he was trained to kill for spectacle. Rome's crowds hungered for blood, and men like Spartacus were their entertainment. Each day he fought with the knowledge that survival meant living to see another sunrise. Nothing more. But within him, a flame still burned. The Thracian spirit refused to die. He watched, learned, waited, and planned. Among the enslaved, he found others who shared his hatred for Rome. They whispered of freedom, of escape, of vengeance. The guards mocked them, believing no slave could ever outwit their Roman masters. Yet in silence, Spartacus prepared. His strength was not only in his arms, but in his will. He studied the routines, the weapons, the weak moments in the guards' discipline. The gladiators' quarters became a prison of rage and brotherhood. Each man who bled beside him became bound by something deeper than fear. They were not merely slaves. They were soldiers waiting to be unleashed. Spartacus's prowess in the arena grew legendary. He fought like a man possessed, precise, relentless, fearless. The crowd cheered his name, yet he despised their cheers. To them, he was a beast to himself. He was a man longing to break his cage. One evening, as the sun bled over Capua's walls, Spartacus gathered his closest allies. Among them were Crixus the Gaul, Oenomaus the African, and Castus the Celt. Together, they forged a pact, live free or die fighting. They decided to strike when the guards least expected. A festival was approaching. Drunkenness would dull their vigilance. Word spread quietly among the slaves, a breath of hope in a place built on despair. A kitchen worker smuggled knives beneath loaves of bread. A guard was bribed, another distracted. The night came heavy with rain, and thunder rolled like a battle cry from the heavens. Spartacus moved like a shadow through the corridors, heart pounding but hands steady. The moment had come. With a swift strike, he killed the first guard and seized his sword. The alarm rang, but the slaves surged forward like a storm. Years of pain erupted into raw fury. They overwhelmed the guards, their chains clattering as they turned into weapons. Fire spread through the training grounds, lighting the night with chaos. Spartacus led them out, cutting through the outer gates. The rain turned the sand to mud, but nothing could stop them now. Dozens escaped, bloodied, panting, free for the first time in years. They fled into the hills surrounding Capua. Behind them, the school burned, and the bodies of their captors lay scattered. For a brief moment, the night was silent, and freedom felt real. But Spartacus knew Rome would come. The Republic would never allow an escaped slave to defy its order. They would send soldiers, merciless and swift. So Spartacus began to plan not for survival, but for war. In the forests near Mount Vesuvius, the rebels built their camp. They armed themselves with whatever weapons they could find. Farmers joined them, runaway slaves, and those who had suffered under Rome's rule. Within weeks, their numbers swelled. They were no longer fugitives. They were an army. Rome laughed at the thought of a slave revolt. The Senate sent a small detachment to crush them. Spartacus waited, using his knowledge of terrain and guerrilla warfare. When the Romans advanced up the narrow slopes of Vesuvius, he struck. His men descended from above, ambushing the legion in a deadly trap. The Romans were slaughtered, their arrogance shattered. Word spread across Italy. A band of slaves had defeated Rome's soldiers. For the first time, fear touched the heart of the Republic. In every village, whispers began. The name Spartacus carried like a storm on the wind. More slaves escaped and sought his camp. Even freemen, disgusted by Rome's corruption, joined his cause. Spartacus did not call himself a king, but his followers saw him as one. He spoke of freedom, of dignity, of a world without masters. Around their campfires, hope took form for the first time in generations. Yet Spartacus knew hope alone would not win a war. He drilled his men, taught them discipline and tactics. He remembered the ways of Thracian warriors, swift, fierce, unpredictable. Soon, his army became something Rome could no longer dismiss. He raided Roman supply lines, struck at garrisons, and vanished into the hills. Each victory drew more recruits. The Senate grew restless, embarrassed by the failures of its commanders. They sent larger forces, but Spartacus outwitted them time and again. His army grew to tens of thousands. For the first time in centuries, the Roman Republic faced an enemy from within its own soil. But Spartacus did not fight to conquer. He fought to escape. He dreamed of crossing the Alps, returning his people to freedom beyond Rome's reach. Yet destiny had other plans, darker and bloodier than he could foresee. The rebellion was no longer his alone. It had become a fire consuming the Republic. As winter drew near, Spartacus stood upon the slopes of Vesuvius, gazing toward Rome's distant lights. He vowed that if death awaited him, it would come with a sword in hand and freedom in his heart. Dawn broke over the mountains, and the world seemed to hold its breath for what was to come. The escaped slaves, once mere fugitives, now stood as soldiers beneath Spartacus's command. Their camp near Mount Vesuvius became a refuge, a place where the broken and the brave gathered. Every new face carried scars, some physical, others carved deep within the soul. They were bound together not by rank or coin, but by one sacred truth. They would never kneel again. Spartacus moved among them, not as a distant leader, but as one of their own. He shared their meals, tended to their wounds, and fought beside them. To his men, he was not a general born of privilege, but a symbol of defiance. He taught them strategy, turning farmers and slaves into disciplined fighters. Each man learned to strike, not for survival, but for vengeance and hope. Word spread across Italy that the rebellion was growing beyond control. Entire estates were overrun, slave masters slain, their wealth redistributed among the free. Rome's senators mocked at first, dismissing the uprising as a nuisance. But when another legion fell to Spartacus's ambush, laughter turned to fear. The Senate appointed Claudius Glaber, a praetor known for arrogance, to crush the rebellion. Glaber surrounded Mount Vesuvius, confident he had trapped the rebels. His men blocked every exit, ensuring starvation would do what swords could not. But Spartacus studied the mountain as if it were a living ally. The Romans believed there was no escape, for the cliffs were too steep, too treacherous. Yet Spartacus saw opportunity where others saw death. He ordered his men to weave vines into makeshift ropes and ladders. In the dead of night, they descended silently down the mountain's unguarded side. Below, they circled around and struck Glaber's camp from behind. Panics tore through the Roman lines as fire and steel rained upon them. Glaber's army was annihilated, their arrogance buried in the ashes of defeat. The slaves rejoiced, their cheers echoing through the valleys like thunder. But Spartacus did not celebrate long. He knew greater storms were coming. Rome would not forgive humiliation twice. More slaves flooded into his ranks, swelling the army beyond 10,000 strong. He organized them into companies, each led by trusted comrades like Crixus and Enos. They trained daily, their discipline sharpening like the blades they carried. Spartacus demanded respect, not cruelty. He forbade needless killing. He sought not to destroy the innocent, but to break Rome's chains. Yet within the camp, divisions began to form. Crixus, proud and impulsive, hungered for open war and plunder. Spartacus counseled patience, strategy, and escape to the north. Their visions clashed, though their brotherhood still held. As spring came, the rebels moved northward through Italy. They seized towns, liberated more slaves, and humiliated local garrisons. Everywhere they passed, Rome's grip weakened, but their victories also drew attention from powerful enemies. The Senate, furious and desperate, sent to consular armies to crush the revolt once and for all. Gellius and Lentulus, both seasoned commanders, marched from opposite directions. The trap was set. A pincer meant to close around Spartacus's army. But Spartacus saw the danger long before it arrived. He divided his forces, ordering Crixus to draw one army away while he faced the other. The plan was bold, dangerous, and costly. On the plains of Mount Garganus, Crixus met Lentulus's legions in brutal combat. Outnumbered and outmaneuvered, Crixus fought valiantly until he fell. His death sent shockwaves through the rebel army. When Spartacus learned of it, his grief turned to fury. He swore vengeance upon Rome for his fallen brother. Gathering his army, he met Gellius's legions head-on. The battle raged through mud and blood, shields splintering beneath relentless blows. Spartacus fought at the front, cutting down soldiers with terrifying precision. The Romans, shocked by his ferocity, broke ranks and fled. Victory was his, but it came with sorrow. Crixus was gone. To honor him, Spartacus held funeral games, not of cruelty, but of meaning. Captured Romans were forced to fight, symbolizing the reversal of their tyranny. The act was both defiance and tribute. As summer waned, Spartacus turned his gaze north toward the Alps. Freedom lay beyond those mountains, safety for his people. The plan was clear: march north, cross the Alps, and disappear from Rome's reach forever. The army moved with determination, thousands strong, a tide of humanity seeking liberty. Along the way, they seized supplies, negotiated with towns, and avoided unnecessary slaughter. Spartacus knew the Romans would come again, and this time with everything they had. Yet many of his followers, drunk on success, began to doubt the retreat. They wanted to march south instead, to take Rome itself. Spartacus refused. He knew such a path would lead only to ruin. But controlling thousands of desperate, angry men was no easy task. The voices of dissent grew louder with each mile. Some broke away, forming smaller bands that looted recklessly. These splinter groups stained the rebellion's cause, giving Rome the excuse it needed. Still, Spartacus pressed on, his leadership unshaken. He was a man driven by purpose, haunted by the blood already spilled. He sent envoys to tribes beyond the Alps, hoping to secure passage and allies. But fate, as ever, turned its cruel wheel. The consuls regrouped, their armies reinforced and emboldened by Roman pride. They marched north, determined to block Spartacus's escape. At Mutina, the two forces clashed in a battle that shook the earth. Spartacus's tactics once again outsmarted his enemies. He feigned retreat, luring the Romans into a valley before closing in from both sides. The trap snapped shut, and Rome's might was torn apart. Thousands of Romans lay dead, their standards trampled beneath the feet of former slaves. The victory was decisive. Spartacus had broken Rome's consular armies. His men rejoiced, chanting his name as if he were a god of freedom. Yet as he gazed northward at the distant mountains, Spartacus hesitated. Beyond them lay freedom, but behind him lay the suffering of countless others still in chains. To leave meant survival. To stay meant war. As the fires of the battlefield dimmed, Spartacus faced the choice that would seal his destiny: escape or defiance. The year was 73 BCE, and the Roman Republic trembled beneath the weight of its own arrogance. In the shadowed valleys of Mount Vesuvius, Spartacus, once a nameless slave, now stood as a leader of thousands. His rebellion had grown beyond escape. It had become a symbol. The Senate called it a slave uprising, but those who followed him whispered a different truth. He was their liberator. Every night, fires burned across the mountains, lighting the sky like stars fallen to earth, the beacons of freedom. Spartacus trained his army relentlessly. They learned to fight not as individuals, but as a force, a living, breathing entity, bound by a single desire: vengeance. His lieutenants Crixus, Enamos, Castus, and Gannicus each commanded factions of fierce warriors, their loyalty forged in the crucible of oppression. Yet, beneath the triumphs, Spartacus wrestled with a growing shadow. Could freedom truly be won through blood? Or was he merely building another tyranny? this time of the broken. The Roman generals underestimated him at first. They sent legions piecemeal, expecting easy victory, and each time the rebels annihilated them. The slaves used the land to their advantage, guerrilla tactics, sudden ambushes, and traps made from the ruins of farms they once toiled on. Word spread through the countryside, not just of rebellion, but of hope. Slaves ran from villas, chained men rose from mines, and women left the kitchens of senators to join the cause. Spartacus's army swelled to over 70,000 souls, a mosaic of languages, faiths, and dreams. For the first time, they felt equal, not under a master's whip, but beneath the same sky. The Senate could no longer ignore them. Marcus Licinius, Crassus, Rome's richest man, was appointed to crush the rebellion. Crassus's methods were brutal. He reintroduced decimation, executing 1 in 10 of his soldiers for cowardice to instill fear and discipline. Meanwhile, Spartacus sought not Rome's destruction, but escape. He aimed to cross the Alps, to lead his people to freedom beyond Roman reach. But greed and glory seduced many of his followers. Crixus, the proud Gaul, refused to retreat. He wanted Rome's blood, not distance. The army split. Spartacus continued north, while Crixus led his men into a doomed battle against Crassus's legions. Crixus fought like a lion cornered by hunters, his sword drenched in Roman blood until the end. When news of his death reached Spartacus, the rebel king ordered gladiatorial games, forcing captured Romans to fight to the death in Crixus's honor. It was vengeance, yes, but also tragedy, a reflection of the very cruelty they had risen against. Spartacus's forces began to weaken. Supply lines faltered. Internal rivalries grew. Freedom was a dream, slipping through their calloused fingers. Still, he pushed onward, leading raids through Lucania and Bruttium, striking from the shadows, never staying long enough to be cornered. Rome, however, adapted. Crassus fortified his positions, building walls and trenches to box in the rebels near the Strait of Messina. Spartacus planned to cross into Sicily, hiring pirate ships to transport his men, but the pirates betrayed him, taking his gold and fleeing. Trapped and surrounded, the once invincible army began to fracture. Famine spread through the camp, and whispers of defeat chilled even the bravest hearts. Still, Spartacus stood before his men, his presence commanding silence. "Rome will not chain us again," he vowed. "If we are to die, it will be as free men, not slaves." The final march began. Spartacus rallied what remained of his army, a weary, wounded force still fueled by rage and faith. They moved south, where Crassus waited with 8 legions. The battlefield was set a sea of bodies, shields glinting like a mirror of doom. Before the clash, Spartacus dismounted his horse, slit its throat, and declared, "If I win, I have no need of a mount. If I lose, one will not save me." His men roared. The cry of the oppressed thundered across the plains, and then they charged. The battle that followed was chaos incarnate, a storm of flesh, iron, and fire. Spartacus cut down centurions with the fury of a god betrayed, each swing of his blade a strike against centuries of chains. Crassus watched from afar, his eyes cold, his heart calculating. He did not admire Spartacus. He feared what he represented. Hours passed, and the field became a graveyard. The rebels fought with the desperation of those who had nothing left to lose. Spartacus himself was wounded, blood soaking his armor, but he refused to fall. Surrounded on all sides, he roared a final defiance, a cry that echoed beyond the din of war. Witnesses said he fought until his sword shattered, until his hands were empty, until his body disappeared beneath the tide of Roman steel. When silence finally fell, tens of thousands of slaves lay dead. Rome had won, but the victory tasted of ash. Crassus ordered 6,000 survivors crucified along the Appian Way, their bodies hanging like grim warnings from Capua to Rome. Yet even in death, Spartacus's legend lived on. Mothers whispered his name to children born in bondage. Poets spoke of him as the man who stood against gods and emperors. He had failed to free the world, but he had awakened it. Centuries later, his rebellion would inspire revolutions, from Haiti to France, from oppressed peasants to workers who demanded dignity. For Spartacus was not merely a man. He was an idea. And ideas do not die on the battlefield. They burn, eternal, in the hearts of those who refuse to kneel. The dust of battle had long settled, but the spirit of Spartacus refused to fade. Whispering through the cracked stones of the Appian Way where his fallen comrades hung as warnings to all who might dream of freedom. Rome declared victory, yet even their own citizens felt unease. For they knew that fear could kill men, but never the hunger for liberty that Spartacus had ignited. In taverns and slave quarters, secret songs began to rise. Verses sung in low voices about a man who defied the legions of Rome and fought for the right to live unchained. Spartacus became more than human. He became a myth, stitched together by survivors, travelers, and rebels across the empire's borders. Some said he had escaped, disappearing into the mountains with a handful of followers. Others claimed his ghost rode the winds of Italy, watching over the oppressed. Roman historians tried to bury his memory under propaganda, painting him as a barbarian, a thief, a traitor who threatened civilization itself. Yet even they could not deny his brilliance, his ability to turn a band of slaves into a disciplined army that humiliated Rome's legions again and again. Crassus, though hailed as the victor, never escaped Spartacus's shadow. Every Roman knew that his triumph had come at a terrible cost to Rome's pride. When Crassus later died in Parthia, rumors spread that it was divine punishment, the gods avenging the crucified slaves whose blood soaked the Italian soil. In the decades that followed, every new uprising invoked his name, as though summoning his spirit gave courage to those about to die for freedom. Centuries later, as the Roman Empire crumbled, the story of Spartacus resurfaced, now cleansed of Roman lies, now told as the tale of defiance itself. Medieval scribes copied his name into manuscripts as a symbol of righteous rebellion against tyrants who ruled with iron and deceit. The church tried to erase him again, fearing that his message that all men were born equal threatened the hierarchy that held power in place. But the idea persisted, passed down from slave to serf, from peasant to soldier, whispered whenever the whip cracked or the tax collector came. By the time of the Renaissance, artists and thinkers began to rediscover him, painting Spartacus as a tragic hero rather than a rebel. Poets spoke of him as the embodiment of human will, the fire that no empire could extinguish, a soul that refused to bend even under death. The Enlightenment transformed him further. Philosophers invoked his struggle as proof that liberty was not granted by kings but seized by courage. Revolutions in France and Haiti echoed his legacy, banners raised with words that mirrored his own unspoken creed, better to die free than live enslaved. In the 19th century, Karl Marx hailed him as the first true revolutionary, the noblest fellow in the whole of ancient history, a warrior of the people before politics had names. His story became the rallying cry of workers, freedom fighters, and dreamers across continents who saw in Spartacus the mirror of their own suffering. When cinema was born, his legend came alive again, most famously in the 1960 film Spartacus, where Kirk Douglas stood before the world and declared, "I am Spartacus." That single line became more than a scene. It became a declaration of unity, a symbol that no man stands alone when he fights for what is right. The film was banned in several authoritarian regimes, proving that, even centuries later, his defiance still frightened those in power. Today, historians debate the details of his life, the size of his army, or even the truth of his death, but none question his impact. His rebellion changed the moral fabric of Rome, forcing senators and citizens alike to confront the cruelty that built their empire. Archaeologists still uncover traces of the revolt, shattered swords, mass graves, coins minted in the chaos, physical echoes of a story too large for myth alone. Modern scholars see Spartacus not just as a hero, but as a reflection of humanity's eternal war between freedom and control. He has become a timeless archetype, the man who refuses to kneel, even before certain death. His name is invoked in movements for justice, equality, and dignity. Wherever the powerful oppress the powerless, more than 2,000 years have passed. Yet the question Spartacus posed still burns in every age. What is a man worth if he will not fight to be free? And as long as that question echoes in the hearts of the defiant, the legend of Spartacus, the slave who rose to challenge an empire, will never die. The fires of rebellion that Spartacus lit did not die with his body. They smoldered in the ashes of Rome's brutality, waiting for the wind of a new age to reignite them. Through centuries of shifting empires and ideologies, his name evolved into something more than history. It became a philosophy. In every corner of the world where tyranny thrived, whispers of his defiance resurfaced, reshaping themselves into local legends, stories of courage told by the oppressed. When enslaved Africans in the Caribbean revolted against their masters, some called their leaders the Spartacus of our land, invoking his unyielding will. In 1791, during the Haitian Revolution, Toussaint Louverture and his generals were likened to him, symbols of liberation that transcended time and geography. The name Spartacus became synonymous with rebellion against injustice, a symbol that united men across continents under the banner of freedom. Even as the industrial world emerged, laborers who toiled under cruel masters found in his tale a mirror of their own struggle. Trade unions and socialist movements of the 19th century adopted his spirit, proclaiming that they, too, were slaves rising against modern Caesars. When Karl Marx wrote of him, he described Spartacus not as a rebel of the past, but as a revolutionary of all time, a man of principle who embodied pure resistance. The Spartacus League in Germany, formed during World War I, took his name to fight for equality and justice amid war and corruption. Its founders, including Rosa Luxemburg, saw in him the unbroken will to stand against empire, and like him, they met death without surrender. From prison cells to battlefields, his name continued to surface, carved on walls, scrawled in manifestos, spoken in secret meetings. He was no longer just a man of Rome's past. He had become a symbol of every oppressed soul that dared to dream of freedom. The 20th century transformed him again through art and film. Most notably in Stanley Kubrick's Spartacus, a film that defied censorship and spoke truth to power. The script, written by Dalton Trumbo, a blacklisted writer, became an act of rebellion itself, mirroring Spartacus's defiance against oppression. When the film premiered, it wasn't just history being retold. It was modern courage being revived through the lens of an ancient struggle. Audiences around the world wept not for the fall of a gladiator, but for the rise of an idea that could never be crucified. The line "I am Spartacus" became a universal cry, a declaration that no tyrant could single out one rebel when all men stood as one. Decades later, protest movements across the globe, from civil rights marches to freedom uprisings, would echo his name as a symbol of unity. Artists, musicians, and writers reimagined his legend, turning it into songs, murals, and novels that celebrated his defiance and compassion. Each retelling reshaped him to fit the age. Sometimes a warrior, sometimes a philosopher, sometimes the spirit of revolution itself. Yet the core of his story never changed, that freedom is worth more than life, and dignity more than survival. In modern classrooms, students learn of him, not just as a Roman rebel, but as a timeless emblem of human resistance against oppression. His name is invoked in discussions of equality, social justice, and the moral courage to resist systems of power. Even military academies study his tactics, acknowledging the genius of a man who, though untrained, outsmarted Rome's finest generals. Archaeologists and historians still search for his burial site, hoping to find some fragment of his legacy beneath the soil of Italy. Yet perhaps the greatest monument to Spartacus is not a grave or a statue, but the countless souls he inspired to rise when silence was safer. His story proves that even a man born into chains can alter the course of empires with nothing but conviction. In this way, Spartacus transcends history. He becomes a mirror reflecting the eternal struggle between the oppressor and the oppressed. Every generation rediscovers him anew, reshaped by the times, but unchanged, in essence, the rebel, the liberator, the symbol of defiance. From the streets of ancient Capua to the digital screens of modern age, his cry for freedom continues to echo. He is in the chants of protesters, the words of activists, and the hearts of those who refuse to bow to unjust rule. His rebellion lives in the courage of those who stand alone, in the quiet acts of defiance that history often forgets. Even as empires crumble and nations rise, Spartacus remains a constant proof that no amount of power can kill the idea of freedom. His life stands as a reminder that true greatness lies not in conquest but in compassion, not in domination but in sacrifice. Those who rule by fear can destroy bodies, but they cannot destroy ideas, and Spartacus became the purest form of an idea. He is the voice that whispers to those in chains, "You are more than what they say you are!" The spirit that moves through rebellions, revolutions, and reformations is the same spirit that moved him to break his first chain. In the end, Rome won the battle, but Spartacus won eternity. His legend outlived the empire that crucified him, and as long as there are those who suffer, his story will rise again, not as history, but as prophecy. The time, the faces, and the weapons may change, but the fire remains, waiting for another Spartacus to awaken. For in every age, there are those who will rather die free than live enslaved, and their leader will always bear his name. The roads of Rome have turned to ruins, the legions to dust. Yet the defiant heartbeat of a single man still echoes through time. Spartacus, a slave who became a symbol, a warrior who became an idea, a man who taught the world that freedom is eternal. His legacy whispers across centuries, urging humanity to remember. The greatest victory is not over others, but over fear itself.